With the sports card market so hot right now, it's hard to keep track of all the things that are constantly buying and selling at higher prices all the time. Well, fortunately, the Pit has a little feature called the Market Insight. So what this feature does is it shows you the latest buy orders and sell orders placed on the site. Not the actual sales, but the actual orders that are placed on the site. So whenever someone lists a card for sale or lists a card to be bought, it shows up on the Pit Market Insight. So today we're going to take a look at the latest sell orders on the site. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is that when you see what's being listed for sale, you get kind of an idea of what is moving currently on the market. And sometimes these aren't even posted for the lowest available prices simply because the market is moving so fast right now that people are trying to make sure that they price their cards uh, competitively versus the greater card market overall. So these are the orders placed on the Pit. And one thing you might notice right here is that there's a mix of sports, but one serious trend that has happened recently, if you start looking down the list in the last couple of days, there's a lot of current players. You see names like Clayton Kershaw and Steven Strasburg popping up. You got Chris Bryant, Alex Bregman, Chris Bryant again. And so while there's still a lot of, you know, earlier 80s and 90s baseball rookie cards, we're definitely starting to see uh, the newer current players start to enjoy some of the same movement that these, I'm not going to say vintage necessarily. I guess technically they'd be considered vintage, the late 80s and early 90s rookies. But as you can see, even the more current players are starting to see movement. Trevor Story as well, and Soto and Soler. So one interesting question that comes up is, well, there's all these guys moving up. So who should I buy? Who should I spend the most who should I pay the most attention to when I'm looking to collect or invest in these cards, either in the short term or the long term? So if you're looking more in the short term, it's good to use this page to get an idea of what is currently moving in the market overall. And because obviously people are listening for sale, they're clearly seeing that there's movement on those cards on eBay or on forums and whatnot. And or it's anticipated movement based on other trends in the market. But when you're looking long term, you want to know, okay, well, is this guy going to make the Hall of Fame? Is this guy going to, be a good return on investment in the long term? So, one tool to use for baseball. There are tools for other sports as well, but for baseball, there's this site called thebaseballgauge.com, and so they have this feature called the Hall of Fame active players. And what this does is it breaks down their probability of reaching the Hall of Fame. So what it does is it takes the average of the last 3 seasons by wins above replacement, and gives you an estimated level of their production. For the next few years. So, for example, with Albert Pujols, he's obviously been slowing down. If you average those 3 years together, you're looking at an estimated 3.3 WAR per year. And and when you take his age into account, he's got about a year and a half left on his contract now, considering he had 2 years left. But now that we've lost basically half the season due to the coronavirus, um, it's likely he's only going to be able to put up, maybe another WAR or so. But as you can see here, he already has 100.3 career WAR, and the average Hall of Famer first baseman has 66.7. So he is essentially a lock for the Hall of Fame. Same with Mike Trout. Mike Trout has put up 8.6. An average of 8.6 over the last 3 years of WAR, and considering his age and how much longer he has to play, he could have another 7 years left to play in the majors, and he's already at 72 and a half WAR, whereas the average center fielder only has about 70.9. So he's pretty much a lock for the Hall of Fame. Robinson Cano is an interesting case because I think a lot of people thought that especially when he was with the Yankees putting up big numbers, everyone kind of saw him as a future Hall of Famer. What's interesting about that is that even with his absolute deep dive with the Mets last year due to injuries and whatnot, even then he's still considered to be a Hall of Fame caliber player. So even if he only plays a couple more years, and as a league average player, which is a a decent approximation of likely what's going to happen. So a league average player is typically around two WAR. So um, if you estimate another 1.8 WAR per year for the next 2 years, basically to the end of his contract. He's already at 69.6, so you would expect that he'd get over 70 WAR before his contract is up. And of course, if he returns to anywhere near where he was before, you're talking about a 3 or 4, 3 win player. So, but he's already basically a lock for the Hall of Fame. The problem is, of course, with Robinson Cano is that he was suspended for the use of performance-enhancing drugs, which definitely has a huge impact on his future support for the Hall of Fame. I mean, but what is interesting is it shows you that he has the number. He actually has the numbers, but he's not. But he's definitely not. Um, he's definitely not being thought about right now. And of course, Miguel Cabrera has had a great career, and he is well over what he needs to get in the Hall of Fame. And Cabrera, we're not. I would say we're not too concerned about his eligibility for the Hall of Fame. He has no PED issues. So real quick, we're gonna take a look at the next few. So some of those names we were seeing Clayton Kershaw, uh, and Mookie Betts and Trevor Story. We're seeing a lot of these names, Alex Bregman. So what's interesting is if you take a look at how they figure this, um, you know, if you look at this right here, Zach Greinke, Justin Verlander, Clayton Kershaw, Max Scherzer are all on basically the cusp in the next couple of years of reaching the amount that they would need to, on average, to reach the Hall of Fame. So what's interesting is typically pitchers are not nearly as sought after in the hobby as offensive players, and that's just kind of how it is in all sports. Defensive players usually don't get the same amount of hobby love as the offensive players. But what's interesting is you take a look at this now. Of course, Justin Verlander's cards have certainly gone up a lot. Kershaw's cards are not exactly cheap, but they're certainly, relatively speaking, much less than you'd expect, considering the guy is so close to getting to the Hall of Fame. Greinke is kind of the same way. Those four guys. And of course, Mookie Betts is looking like the best bet right now. That's not meant to be a pun. They actually give him an 89.6% probability of getting the Hall of Fame. He's only 26. He's already put up 42 WAR in his career. The formula expects that he'll play probably at least another 8 years. And at his current level, 8.1, which is probably a little bit high. I mean, I don't know that he can sustain an 8.1 pace, especially with that crazy 10.9 WAR year he had in 2018. But it's realistic to expect that even if he only puts up say 6 WAR over the next on average over the next 4 or 5 years, he's very very easily going to reach the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame, basically the cutoff for right fielders, which is about 71.1. And so he only needs about 29.2 to reach that milestone over the next 8 years. So basically, if you divide that 29.2 over 8, and obviously 8 years is that would only make him 34. So it's very very likely that as long as Mookie Betts doesn't completely fall apart and become a substandard player, which is very unlikely, he has a very good chance. And it's interesting because you look at his cards, and his cards, I mean, are not cheap, but they're certainly not where you would expect a guy who's very likely a future Hall of Famer. Kershaw, obviously has had quite a career. Of course, he hasn't gotten over the playoff hump. He's had some very bad luck in the playoffs. When you compare him though to Steven Strasburg, they only give him a 23% chance. And yes, he's had a lot of success recently, but the problem is that he's already 30 years old. He's only put up about 34 WAR in his career, and the average, the hump that we're trying to get over to get in the Hall of Fame is about 73 WAR. So he has about he's going to need another 39 to get to the Hall of Fame. I mean, that's possible. It's certainly possible. But even if he plays 8 more years at 5 WAR a year, If he pitches till he's 38 and he can put up 5 WAR a year, then yeah, he could make, he could squeak into the Hall of Fame. But pitching at a 5 WAR pace, on average is pretty difficult. I mean, yes, he is that good of a pitcher. The question is he going to hold up? He's already had so many injury issues in his career. He has pitched a lot of innings. I mean, it's possible, but he has such an outside chance at the Hall of Fame. So, if you had to choose, and even Jarrett Cole, they only give him a 26.3. Of course, he's 2 years younger. So he has a little bit more chance. You have to take that into consideration. So, this probability obviously is taking into account the last 3 years of their career. One interesting thing I want to point out before I end this is there's a couple of names at the bottom here that they actually give no chance of getting in the Hall of Fame, which I find kind of strange. Um, CC Sabathia and Suzuki. Now, of course, with Ichiro, of course, also played many years in Japan, and obviously, in Hall of Fame voting, that's going to be taken into consideration, whereas this doesn't take that into consideration. And Sabathia, I'm actually kind of surprised as well because a lot of people think of him. He has the milestones, all the strikeouts and the wins, but the WAR, it's not there. And so he's going to be an interesting case. I personally think that he is going to get in the Hall of Fame someday. He's probably not going to be a first ballot, but it's interesting if you look at the names here. These are not guys that you necessarily would think of already being on pace for the Hall of Fame. And we got guys like Soroka and Devers and Soto already on this list. I think that the Harper might actually be a little low here. But you wouldn't expect some of these guys to be this high on the list already. But it's important to look at this because kind of puts into perspective their numbers in relative um, to their future Hall of Fame chances. So this is definitely a site that you'll want to look at when you're deciding what players you want to invest in their rookie cards. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Hope that you got a lot of information out of it. Definitely check out the site if you're into collecting baseball cards for the long term. Definitely a good resource. Hope to see you trading on the pit soon. Happy collecting, everyone.